Total victory was now out of the question, but the tanks had to get to Oosterbeek, where 1st Airborne were being besieged in a pocket, what the Germans called the Hexenkessel, or Witch's Cauldron. Over the next 2 days, the British raced north to Nijmegen to get to the paratroopers, and the Germans raced south from Arnhem to stop them. If the British get to Oosterbeek, and if they can get reinforcements across the river, there's still a chance they could claw their way to victory. Last time we saw Frost's perimeter shrink to a few houses, while Frost himself is taken prisoner. 1st Airborne was forced back to Oosterbeek to form some sort of defence. 3rd Battalion of the 504th heroically crossed the Waal and took the north side of the Nijmegen Bridge as tanks of 30 Corps crossed the span. German resistance continued in Nijmegen though for several hours, preventing the British from striking north. And the 101st held against a surprise attack, again, from Panzer Brigade 107. In this episode I'm going to cover 2 days, the 21st of September and the 22nd. Let's start with the 21st, a Thursday, day 5 of Operation Market Garden. At Arnhem Bridge, the last gasps of 2 para could be heard as they held on in the hope of relief, but it was all in vain. Organised British resistance collapsed sometime in the morning of the 21st of September, although it's worth mentioning that some lone British paratroopers continued to fight on until the 23rd. Arnhem was now totally within German hands. The last radio message from the bridge, picked up by Germans and not by any Allied unit, read, "Out of ammunition, God save the King." Frost's men were finally overwhelmed at Arnhem, and the Germans had access to Arnhem Bridge and the road south. With the loss of Arnhem Bridge, total victory for the Allies was now impossible. But they still had a chance to get to the British at Oosterbeek and get a bridge across the Rhine. At least that is what Urquhart hoped. Around 3,600 paratroopers held the newly formed perimeter at Oosterbeek. The important point to note at this time is that the Heavedorp ferry was still within British hands. Unfortunately, the ferry itself had been sunk the day before, just in case it fell into German hands. But the area was the best place near Oosterbeek to form a Bailey Bridge, since there were roads close by. Holding onto this area was therefore the last chance of victory, and it fell to a handful of men from 1st Border to keep Heavedorp in British hands. At around 8 o'clock in the morning, the Germans attacked from all sides of the Oosterbeek perimeter. They used assault guns and tanks to support their infantry assaults, but there was an unexpected stiffness to the British defences. Unlike in the previous day's actions, the British had a lot of troops in a very small, mostly wooded or urban area, and they were defending. This gave them an advantage they hadn't had in the past. 9th SS, championed by units like Kampfgruppe Spindler, attacked from the east. German snipers did manage to infiltrate the British positions, since there weren't enough British to form a solid defence line. These snipers took their toll, but the British resisted strongly. They took out some of the German tanks, or forced them back with heavy anti-tank fire. They even managed to capture a Sturmgeschütz assault gun from the Germans, but couldn't figure out how to use it, so they had to abandon it. However, 10th Battalion were decimated in the centre during these days, and only a handful of men were able to fall back. Despite this loss, the Germans maybe gained a couple of 100 metres of ground the entire day. In the west, von Tettau's untrained troops also made very little progress against the tight British defence, with British sniper fire now taking a heavy toll on the Germans as well. However, the Heavedorp ferry area was captured by the Germans after a heavy fight, and with it, the last chance of Operation Market Garden succeeding. British supplies were once again dropping behind enemy lines. The Paras set up all manner of signals on the ground to try and sway the RAF to drop supplies to them, but they failed. The RAF was now suffering heavy losses, resupplying their enemy, who were using those supplies to fight the Paras, who the supplies were meant to be for. But the good news for 1st Airborne was that today contact was finally made with 30 Corps, and 30 Corps had artillery, which the belligerent paratroopers called in to stall the Germans. Steel rain blunted several German attacks, and the Germans thought their artillery was firing short, so they started firing flares to try and stop their own artillery firing. Nope, it was British artillery, and this would be a big reason for why the British would continue to hold out Oosterbeek over the next few days. Like at Nijmegen, artillery was useful in preventing attacks from forming, and when the British Paras saw an attack forming, they'd simply call in artillery to disrupt the German attacks. More good news for 1st Airborne came in the afternoon. At 5 o'clock, a new armada covered the skies. The Polish independent parachute brigade descended from the heavens. Now, weather in England had delayed the Poles from setting off. They were originally meant to be dropped 2 days earlier on day 3 of the operation. They were supposed to be dropped near Arnhem, but the situation had changed dramatically since then. So Urquhart changed the plan at the last minute to drop the Poles north of Driel, which was to the south of the Rhine and south of the used-to-be cauldron. Their task was to support 1st Airborne as best they could and, if possible, get men and supplies across the river. It was also to guard the approaches to the river, so 30 Corps could maybe attempt to cross it. However, things went wrong for the Poles right from the start. A portion of the Polish brigade didn't even take off from England, and whilst the Allies may have had air superiority over most of Europe, they did not over this battlefield. You see, in previous months, the RAF and US Air Force had dominated the skies, disrupting German movements and logistics, and bombed German ground units at the request of Allied units. But because the US Air Force feared mixing fighters with transport planes, there had been little to no air support available for the Allied units during Operation Armageddon. As a result, the German Luftwaffe was able to hunt down a portion of the American planes taking the Poles to their destination. General Urquhart was of the opinion after the war that the lack of air support was a deciding factor in this battle. Once the Poles reached Driel and parachuted to their destination, they realised 2 things. 1, only around 1,000 men, perhaps less, of their entire brigade had made it, and 2, that the British at Oosterbeek had lost the area around the Heefdorp ferry. This threw off the original plan to have the Poles support 30 Corps in crossing the Rhine. Their only hope now was to try and assist 1st Airborne as best they could and maybe get troops across the river. The Germans were taken completely by surprise by the Polish landing. They feared the worst, that the Poles would get across the Rhine or perhaps even swing around their rear and capture the southern end of the Arnhem road bridge. That would cut off 9th SS's retreat as 30 Corps would crush them from the front. This was a fantasy because thousands or so paratroopers weren't capable of doing that, but nonetheless the Germans reacted quickly, sending in all reserves to form a blocking line, or Band, named after its commander, Harzer. Band Harzer consisted of 5 battalions, perhaps as many as 2,400 men, and now blocked the route to Arnhem. This force engaged the 1,000 or so Poles in Driel as the Poles formed an all-round defence, waiting for 30 Corps to link up with them. The impact of the Polish drop is significant. Whilst they couldn't get across the Rhine, because the ferry was now lost, they did draw off all German reserves in the area. According to Robert J. Kershaw in his book, It Never Snows in September, the Germans had been planning to destroy the British at Oosterbeek in a planned attack on the 22nd. But now they had to take all their reserves to counter the Polish drop. If this is true, the Polish saved 1st Airborne from complete annihilation. The Polish drop would also give the Allies the last chance to cross the Rhine. 30 Corps sent reconnaissance units forwards to the area known as the Island. In this area, the main road was raised up above the surrounding fields, themselves split not by hedges but by ditches and streams. Basically, British tanks advancing this way would be exposed to anything the Germans could fire at them, with little chance of retaliation. So even though 30 Corps resumed its attack towards Arnhem at 1:30 in the afternoon, it soon got bogged down in the fighting. 5 leading tanks were hit and set on fire by Panther and 88mm guns, and the attack ground to a halt. With the tanks unable to proceed, it was decided that the infantry should lead the attack, and the 43rd Infantry Division was picked for this role. Unfortunately, the 43rd Infantry Division was still stuck at Nijmegen, and the traffic up this one road, now referred to as Hell's Highway, was just awful. So the attack was delayed. The Germans were also sending in a steady stream of reinforcements into the island area, meaning that there was little chance of reaching either 1st Airborne or the Poles this day. The 22nd of September was a Friday, and it was now day 6 of Operation Armageddon. Like the day before, there was still hope that 30 Corps could reach the paratroopers at Oosterbeek and create some sort of victory. That chance was lost today, as Kampfgruppe Walther launched a counterattack, not in the north at the island, but at Wegel against the 101st. They aimed to cut the corridor, as they had done a couple of days earlier at Somme. Again, it was the Panther tanks of Panzer Brigade 107 that headed the attack. This time, though, it was supported by grenadiers, flak batteries, artillery, Fallschirmjäger, tank destroyer battalion, and more. They would attack the right flank of the road, which is now nicknamed Hell's Highway by the Allies. On the left side of the road, another formation, Kampfgruppe Huber, also went in on the attack. This had infantry supported by artillery, anti-tank guns, and even 4 Jagdpanther tank destroyers. This force would attack at Schindel, but aimed at Veghel. Despite a shortage of artillery shells, this was a concerted attack and proved devastating for the 101st and the British too. Shortly after 9 o'clock in the morning, the German attack went in. Artillery pounded the American positions and tanks of Camp Group Walther moved ahead. Veghel was reached at around 11 with Panther tanks and Panzer Grenadiers cutting Hell's Highway from the north. They then turned south to Veghel, where a battle erupted with the American 501st Regiment. On the other side of the road, Camp Group Huber got into the outskirts of Schindel, where they were able to fire at Veghel Canal Bridge. 506 Regiment, supported by British tanks, were able to push them back. Equally, 501st, supported by British tanks and an unending artillery bombardment, halted Camp Group Walther. The Germans found themselves unable to continue the attack as night fell, but they had cut the corridor, and this meant that 30 Corps supplies and reinforcements wouldn't get through to the north. And the British desperately needed infantry reinforcements in the north. Some elements, including tanks of 43rd Division, managed to reach the Polish Independent Brigade at Driel sometime in the evening, but the island still caused problems and the attack could not be made successfully towards Arnhem. Worse, tank units in Nijmegen that could be used for the advance were sent south to deal with the Veghel cut. Clearly, the British attack was losing steam. Lieutenant Colonel Charles Mackenzie, the staff officer who told Hicks he was in command of 1st Airborne when Urquhart was missing, crossed the Rhine in a rowboat and spoke to the Polish commander Sosabowski. He impressed upon Sosabowski the desperate situation in Oosterbeek Cauldron and said that even a handful of reinforcements could make all the difference. That night, 60 men from Sosabowski's brigade got across the river and reinforced the Oosterbeek perimeter. But 60 Polish paratroopers weren't enough to change the course of the battle. Harzer had decided that the British in the Oosterbeek pocket would be pounded into submission by mortars and Nebelwerf rather than all-out attack. There were a few reasons behind this change in tactics. One was that a good portion of the German reinforcements had moved south to block the Polish landing and the British tanks. Essentially, the British pocket at Oosterbeek was now merely a distraction from the main event further south. Another reason was that the Germans left at Oosterbeek were mostly untrained conscripts backed by only a few veteran Kampfgruppen. These troops could not be capable of mounting the assaults needed to root out the British from their strong point. Attacks were still carried out, but it wasn't the all-out storming of positions that would overwhelm the Paras from all sides kind of attack that the British were expecting. As a result, the British pocket remained virtually unchanged and the Paras continued to hold. So the battle has shifted in the last couple of days. Frostmen fought on until the very end. The Poles had landed, causing the Germans to move reinforcements south, perhaps saving 1st Airborne from annihilation. 30 Corps had problems linking up with the Poles, especially since Hell's Highway had been cut near Veghel, and the loss of the heaved-up ferry. It now seemed unlikely that the Allies could still achieve victory. If you were Urquhart and you had the choice of choosing the Polish landing zone, where would you drop them? Would you drop them at Driel? Would you land them south of Arnhem? Or would you land them somewhere on the north side of the Rhine to support 1st Airborne? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, thanks for subscribing, and bye for now.